And I think that I just have to respectfully go, have a good life.
Kody sat down in the interview chair with a look that nobody had seen on him before, neither on the show, nor in behind-the-scenes clips, nor in any fan-recorded interactions. There was no loud bravado, no defensive posture, no wide gestures meant to dominate the room. Instead, he looked strangely still. The producers whispered among themselves, because even they, after more than a decade of working with him, could feel something different in the air. It wasn't tension. It was something heavier. Almost like a man realizing that the version of himself he had spent years protecting was finally slipping through his fingers. The interviewer, better prepared than usual, opened a folder full of notes and timelines. They weren't going to let this be another chaotic Kody monologue where he overwhelmed the room. This time, questions were lined up that called for direct answers, factual responses, and emotional accountability. And Kody didn't push back for reasons nobody understood yet. He just inhaled, slow and shaky, as if he already knew what was coming. The cameras rolled, and the silence stretched for several seconds. Usually, Kody would break it with some grand declaration or joke meant to take control. But this time, he simply looked at the floor, then at the interviewer, then at the glass window where producers stood watching. When he finally spoke, his voice didn't sound like the Kody viewers had grown used to. It carried the tone of a man who had been cornered not by others, but by the consequences of his own choices. He launched into a speech about the early seasons, about how this family once felt. It was teaching the world about something positive, something strong, something united. He said he really had thought, at the time, that they were breaking stereotypes. But as he continued to speak, the words gradually changed. There was a pause in which he visibly swallowed hard and said that, somewhere along the way, he began confusing leadership with control, guidance with domination, and concern with paranoia. Even the crew exchanged glances since Kody rarely, if ever, admitted to a flaw unless it could be directly attributed to someone else's fault. And then the interviewer pressed gently, asking when he thought things started to break. Kody didn't dodge. Instead, he leaned back and said it hadn't been one moment. It had been a collection of small choices, little cracks that formed each time he insisted he was right, even when deep inside he knew he wasn't. He spoke about how each of the wives had a moment when she tried to tell him that something was wrong, something was drifting, something was hurting her. He admitted he chose not to listen, because listening would have required changing. And change, he said plainly, terrified him. The air now grew even heavier as he began to talk about Christine. Not the explosive arguments, not the on-camera confrontations, but the quiet moments he ignored. The late-night conversations she tried to start. The emotional distance she felt growing long before she said it out loud. The pieces of herself she kept shrinking just to keep the peace. He knew full well he didn't catch it. Or perhaps chose not to, because to do so would have confronted him with a very unwanted reality, that their family structure wasn't working anymore. Then, for the first time, he said he knew exactly when he lost her. It wasn't in the heated arguments or the harsh words exchanged later. It was in a moment off camera, years before the public ever sensed a fracture. He described her sitting across from him with a look that wasn't angry, wasn't sad, but simply empty. A look that told him she had already decided to stop waiting for him to change. He remembered realizing it, but instead of fighting for the relationship in a meaningful way, he clung harder to control. He said he regrets that more than anything. The interviewer asked him whether he knew why viewers would say that he never showed empathy. Rather than snapping back, he nodded and quietly said that he had convinced himself empathy was weakness. He said he had built an identity around being the strong one, the decisive one, the one whose word had to be final. But looking back, he now realized strength, without compassion, was just stubbornness wearing armor. As he spoke, something in him cracked open. He talked about Janelle's calm disappointment, Meri's years of isolation, Robin's reliance on him that slowly became pressure, and how his children started pulling away emotionally long before they physically separated. He described moments he wished he could redo, not to change the outcome, but to change the way he reacted. By the time the interviewer asked him what he hoped this interview would accomplish, Kody exhaled deeply. He didn't expect forgiveness, he didn't expect the fans to all of a sudden understand him, and he didn't expect his family magically to heal. What he wanted, he said, was for people to see him, not as the villain or the victim, but as someone finally ready to confront the truth he had avoided for so long. The camera remained on him as he concluded with a hushed line that no producer expected. This interview wasn't to save his reputation. It was about finally acknowledging the damage he helped create. What happened next in this interview was not expected by anyone, not even the producers who had prepared questions for weeks. Kody leaned forward, looked straight into the camera with a seriousness that instantly changed the energy of the whole room, and admitted there were things he had avoided talking about for years. Not because he wanted to hide them, he claimed, but because he didn't think anyone would understand the pressure he felt as the center of such a large and complicated family. He started by saying that when Sister Wives first began, he thought the show would be a means of binding his family closer. He felt that by opening their lives to the public, people would recognize and understand the good in their lifestyle. The wives' love for one another, the order and functioning of their home. But as he started speaking, it became obvious that what he had expected and what actually happened were two completely different realities. The producers, though sitting just off camera, instantly became silent. Even they looked somewhat shocked that he was going this deep. Kody confessed that once the cameras took over their home, it disrupted the natural balance between all the wives. Suddenly there were storylines, expectations, and fan opinions, and constant comparisons with the wives. He confessed to often feeling trapped in this role as the leader, yet bound to be the emotional support for four completely different women, each with their needs, struggles, and perspectives. Somewhere down the line, he said, he stopped being the husband they knew and became the man the show required him to be. He went on to talk about the pressure he felt during the pandemic, a topic that had caused some of the biggest fractures in the family. He admitted that, upon reflection, he realized how rigid, controlling, and afraid he had become. He said his strict rules were not designed to punish the wives, but had come from a deep place of fear about losing control of a situation that he didn't understand. His voice slightly cracked as he said, he knew people thought he favored Robin, but the reality was a lot more complicated. He said Robin adhered more closely to his rules, and that made him feel less alone during a moment when he felt like the whole world was falling apart. The interviewer asked if he regretted how he handled things. Kody paused for a very long moment. The silence was extended, and you could literally feel the tension through your screen. Then he said something that shocked not only his family but also all the onlookers. He admitted, yes, he did regret many of the choices he made. He regretted the arguments, the distance, and the years of poor communication. But mostly he regretted not listening more carefully to the wives, who were trying to explain what they were feeling. He said he believes that if he had taken more time to understand their fears, rather than reacting from his own, the family might not be as fractured today. He shared how, for years, he felt being the leader meant being strong, making decisions quickly. Now he learned that leadership also meant showing vulnerability, patience, and a willingness to admit when wrong. And that, he said, was something he had learned far too late. Then he asked Christine how she was, which led to her leaving the family being one of the most critical points of change in the whole series. Kody took a slow breath before answering. He mentioned that losing Christine broke him in ways he never anticipated. Not because she was the first to leave, but in some ways she finally challenged this core belief that he had. Nobody in this family would ever quit on plural marriage. He says that she made him face the things he had been circumventing all these years, like the resentment she harbored, the emotional distance between them, and how he sometimes unwittingly pushed her away from himself. He said that he now realized Christine didn't leave because of one event or one disagreement. She left because her emotional needs weren't being satisfied over a very long period of time. He admitted that his attempts to make amends came too late, and he now sees how blind he was to her pain. He explained that he used to believe he could hold the family together simply by being present. But Christine's departure showed him that presence means nothing if the emotional connection isn't there. At this point, the interviewer brought up Meri, and Kody's whole demeanor changed. He conceded that his relationship with Meri had been slipping long before the public realized it. He said the catfishing scandal created a wound that neither one of them knew how to repair. He admitted that he stopped trying in the relationship, claiming at the time he thought Meri didn't want him anymore. Now he realizes he closed the emotional door long before articulating it out loud. When he finally said he did not see a romantic future with her, that was not to hurt her, it was just a truth he had been carrying for years. He said the weight of pretending was hurting both of them, but he also admitted his delay in speaking the truth caused even more pain. He said he didn't realize how deeply Meri felt abandoned until watching the episodes later. The interviewer asked him whether he believes he could have handled things differently, and he said yes. He could have communicated more clearly instead of letting years of distance accumulate. When the topic of Janelle came up, Kody referred to her as the wife who always tried to bring stability. He said she was the one who held everything together, was working behind the scenes, organizing things, managing finances, and making sure that everything was balanced. But he said as soon as she felt that he no longer respected her independence, the relationship changed. He said they bumped heads because he was expecting more emotional loyalty from her, and she wanted more flexibility and understanding from him. He acknowledged he didn't realize how powerful that frustration had grown until she finally told him she was done. As Kody continued talking, viewers began noticing something they had never seen from him before. He was taking accountability without deflecting blame. He acknowledged that losing the respect of 3 wives wasn't something that happened overnight. It was the result of years of miscommunication and emotional neglect, things he didn't fully understand until it was too late. Then came that part of the interview that really shocked everyone. Kody said for the first time in his life, he realized that he was afraid to lose his identity, afraid to be judged, and afraid finally to confront those parts of himself he didn't want to see. Christine leaving made him come face to face with all these fears, as he said. He said the collapse of the family wasn't just the breakdown of plural marriage, it was the collapse of the version of himself he believed he needed to be. He spoke about therapy, something he had resisted for years. He said he finally started going, not because someone made him do so, but because he knew he needed to figure out why his relationships were falling apart. He mentioned that he came upon things to learn about himself that were hard to accept, like how his need for control actually came from insecurity and not strength, and how he often reacted emotionally before thinking, especially when he felt disrespected. The interviewer did ask him what he was hoping for in the future. Kody said he didn't expect everything to go back to the way it was, nor did he expect the wives to suddenly forgive him and rebuild what was broken. He did say that he hoped the interview would at least show that he was trying to grow, trying to understand, and trying to rebuild himself, even if the family never fully came back together. He said the most important thing he learned was that trying to force unity only pushed people farther away. He said he now understands that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people move in the direction they need, even when the path no longer includes you. He again looked into the camera and said he wasn't the same man he was a year ago. He said he understood that a lot of viewers disliked him, judged him, or believed he was the sole reason the family fell apart. But he also said that the man in that chair, the one speaking honestly rather than defensively, was someone trying to heal and rebuild. He admitted he made many mistakes, and that he couldn't change the past, but he hoped the interview would at least begin a new conversation. One that was not about blame, but about understanding, growth, and acceptance. Kody leaned back in the studio chair, attempting a neutral expression, but the tension in the room was impossible to hide. The lights were hot, the cameras felt too close, and the producers looked far too eager. He knew this interview was different. They weren't warming him up. They weren't chatting casually. They were waiting for him to slip, to confess, to react. Something was coming, and he felt it. When the interviewer leaned forward, holding a new stack of notes, Kody's pulse jumped. He recognized the look. Someone about to drop something big. "We've spoken with people who were there," the interviewer began slowly. "People who haven't spoken publicly before." Kody's jaw tightened, but he kept his posture straight. He'd learned to mask discomfort after years of TV, but even he knew his composure was cracking. The interviewer carefully read the next line, almost testing him. "They claim something happened in the months before the separation. Something you haven't discussed." Kody blinked, trying to keep his breath steady. Another unseen story. Another accusation. Another twist. He could feel the producers watching him, waiting for a reaction they could use as a promo clip. He forced himself not to respond immediately, letting the silence settle. But the silence made it worse. His mind replayed every moment of those months. He'd said things he regretted. He'd made choices he had thought were defensible at the time. He remembered scenes that had never made it to air. The arguments and the conversations behind the closed doors, the nights when resentment was louder than reason. And he knew if any of that had leaked, this interview was about to take a turn he couldn't control. The interviewer continued. "They claim there was a moment where everything changed, not just for Christine, but for the whole family." Kody exhaled slowly, trying to prepare himself. Hearing Christine's name brought back the memories he had worked so hard to avoid. Their conversations had turned sharp, the trust had crumbled, and the connection they once shared felt like it had come from another life, one that didn't exist anymore. He had watched her pull away, and he had blamed her for it. But deep down he knew that wasn't the whole truth. When the interviewer revealed what had been said, Kody flinched. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough for anyone paying attention to notice. The producers surely saw it. The interviewer definitely did. It was a detail only insiders could know. Something the cameras never caught, something personal. For the first time in the entire interview, Kody lost the polished tone he had rehearsed. His voice was softer, more defensive, almost surprised. "I didn't think that would ever come out," he muttered, realizing the microphone had picked up every word. The interviewer leaned forward. "So you admit it happened?" Kody hesitated, not because he wanted to lie, but because he suddenly realized what hung in the balance with every word out of his mouth. It was a headline waiting to happen. A promo. A reaction clip, plastered across social media. And worse, it would give people new ammunition against him, new reasons to judge him. He shook his head slightly, searching for a version of the truth that wouldn't destroy what was left of his reputation. The room felt smaller, the lights hotter. For the first time, he looked less like the confident father figure, and more like someone cornered by the consequences of years' worth of unresolved issues. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, speaking slowly. Things were complicated. People think they know everything, but they don't understand what was happening inside that house, inside our family. His voice quavered, something rare for him. It wasn't as simple as one moment, it was many. The interviewer didn't interrupt him. They let him speak because they knew the vulnerability would play well on camera. Kody continued, almost thinking out loud. He talked about the pressure and expectations, the weight of trying to hold together a family structure that didn't work anymore. Anger built up over years. Conversations turned into arguments, and arguments into silence. Somewhere in that stream of honesty, he revealed more than he actually meant to reveal. Details about emotional distance, choices that he regretted, and decisions he wished he could take back. When he finally stopped talking, the room was silent. No producers whispering, no papers shuffling, just the sound of Kody breathing, trying to regain control of himself. The interviewer studied him for a long moment before asking the question that made him look up sharply. "If Christine watches this interview, What do you want her to hear? For the first time, Kody didn't have a prepared answer. He didn't have some sort of defensive explanation. He just stared down at his hands, still trying to process everything he had just opened up. His voice, when it came, was low. I want her to know I understand now. I didn't then, but I do now. The interviewer didn't push further. They didn't need to. They had the moment they wanted. And Kody knew it. He leaned back in his chair, feeling exposed and unsure of what the world would say when the episode aired. The interview wasn't over yet, but something inside him had shifted. This wasn't just another storyline. This wasn't just TV. This was the beginning of the consequences he wasn't sure he could stop. The tension in the room was palpable as Kody continued to answer the probing questions, the weight of his previous actions and decisions pressing down on him like never before. Every word, every hesitation seemed to unravel the carefully constructed image he had maintained for decades. Christine watched intently, her expression a mix of disappointment and vindication, while Janelle and Meri exchanged glances that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. The interviewer, sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed further, asking about the controversial decisions regarding property, finances, and the emotional well-being of the children. Kody's attempts to justify himself only highlighted the cracks in the foundation he had built. And as he fumbled through explanations, even minor inconsistencies were seized upon, painting a picture that no amount of charm could mask. Outside the camera's lens, whispers and speculation began circulating among the crew and family members alike. Questions about loyalty, manipulation, and long-held secrets surfaced, creating an undercurrent of unease that threatened to boil over at any moment. The interview was no longer just a recount of events. It became an examination of character, intent, and the hidden motivations behind every decision Kody had made. Each segment of questioning seemed to peel back another layer, revealing conflicts and alliances that had remained hidden in plain sight. As Kody shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny, Christine leaned forward, seizing the opportunity to interject with details that corroborated suspicions long whispered behind closed doors. The dynamic of the room changed, moving from tension to confrontation, as Kody struggled to regain control of the narrative. By the time the interview reached its midpoint, the cracks were not just visible. They were glaring. Recollections of key events, once told from his perspective, were contradicted by testimonies and evidence that Christine and the others had prepared meticulously. It was a turning point, a moment where the balance of power subtly shifted, signaling that the carefully guarded family image was beginning to crumble. The emotional undertones were undeniable. Kody's frustration, Christine's resolve, and the silent acknowledgement from other family members that things would never return to the way they once were. The interviewer, sensing a climactic revelation, continued to press for an accounting of confessions and admissions that Kody might have never given under any other circumstances. The room felt charged, every detail significant, every silence loaded with implication. It became clear as the segment drew to a close that the interview would not only chronicle events, but would rewrite the history of the family, exposing truths that had long since been buried. The fallout of these revelations was sure to bring consequences, both public and personal, that none of those who participated in the interview could have ever fully imagined, setting the stage for the remaining segments where the full extent of the fallout would unfold. As the interview came to a close, the room was thick with unspoken tension. Kody sat back, exhausted, a mix of frustration and disbelief written across his face. The carefully constructed persona he had maintained for years was now unraveling, thread by thread. Christine's eyes were steady, unwavering, as she calmly recounted incidents, details, and decisions that Kody had long tried to conceal or rationalize. Her words carried weight, each one a precise arrow aimed at revealing the truth. Janelle and Meri added their perspectives, reinforcing Christine's statements with corroborating memories and observations, painting a picture of a family strained by secrecy, manipulation, and a longing for accountability. The interviewer leaned in, sensing the dramatic tension, asking questions that required Kody to confront uncomfortable realities. Every answer he gave seemed to further validate the claims of his wives, highlighting inconsistencies, questionable motives, and the consequences of decisions that had affected not just the adults, but the children as well. Outside the camera's gaze, the crew whispered, noting the intensity and the palpable shift in dynamics. Discussions that had previously been private were now being documented for a wider audience, amplifying the pressure. Kody attempted to regain composure, but the momentum had shifted. The narrative was no longer his to control. Christine's resolve, Janelle's clarity, and Meri's perspective collectively dismantled the facade, revealing the human cost of choices made over decades. As the recording ended, there was a moment of silence, heavy with realization. Kody realized the implications of what had just unfolded. His legacy, his authority, and his control over the family story had been irreparably challenged. The wives, though visibly exhausted, exuded a sense of relief and empowerment, knowing that the truth was finally out. Outside, the ripple effects were already beginning. Viewers, fans, and critics would dissect every detail, every gesture, and every word, forming narratives of their own. The interview had become more than a recounting of events. It was a catalyst for change, a revelation that promised to alter the course of relationships, reputations, and perceptions forever. As Kody walked away, the impact of exposure hung in the air, a sobering reminder that secrets buried long ago could no longer stay hidden when thrust into the light of their deepest realities by the courage and clarity of those who had lived through it. The story didn't end with this interview. It began anew, one in which accountability, truth, and transparency would now redefine their family dynamics and challenge every assumption ever held about Kody's control. Lingering in the minds of viewers and family members alike was the question of how Kody would eventually respond to the confrontation he had never before faced, and what the lasting consequences might be for a family whose private struggles had now been made public spectacle. The final moments of raw emotion from everyone involved set the scene for what was sure to be a period of reckoning, reflection, and perhaps ultimate resolution.